The iron beast hissed, exhaling a plume of white steam that instantly vanished into the searing dry heat of the Arizona territory. The metal of the train car groaned as it settled against the tracks, ticking like a dying clock. Cora Ellison stepped onto the wooden platform of Esperanza Gulch. The first thing she felt was the dust. It was not the gray, polite soot of Boston that one could brush off a sleeve. This was red dust, ancient and pervasive, tasting of iron and dried blood. It coated the back of her throat in a single breath. She clutched her small, battered valise with both hands, her knuckles white. The dress she wore, a high-collared gray cotton suitable for a New England autumn, felt like a suffocating wool blanket under this relentless sun. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but the light had a savage quality, bleaching the color out of the wooden boardwalks and the false front buildings that lined the single main street. With a trembling hand, Cora reached into her pocket to touch the letter. The paper was soft from months of reading and rereading. Mr. Samuel Henderson, rancher, widower, kind. Those were the words she clung to. Kind. She did not need to be rich. She did not need to be handsome. She needed a place where no one knew her name, and where the whispers of Boston society could not reach her. Unconsciously, her left hand drifted to her right wrist, her thumb tracing the thin, white line of a scar hidden beneath her lace cuff. It was the mark left by a silk rope, a souvenir from a night that had shattered her life into jagged shards. Damaged goods, the voice in her head whispered. It was her father's voice, slurred with whiskey, shouting at her after the incident. Who will take you now? Cora, you are spoiled fruit. She pushed the memory down, swallowing the bile that rose in her throat. She was 22 years old, and she had traveled 2,000 miles to become a wife. She would be a good wife. She would scrub floors in men's shirts and cook stews. And perhaps, if she worked hard enough, she could scrub the stain of her past from her soul. The platform was crowded with people moving with purposeful lethargy. Men in dusty coats, women with tired faces, miners with grime etched into their skin. The smell of the town was a thick soup of unwashed bodies, horse manure, stale beer, and old gunpowder. And then she saw him. He stood apart from the crowd, near the edge of the platform where the shadows of the water tower stretched long and thin. He was tall, with broad shoulders that did not slump under the heat like the other men. His hair was black, dark as a raven's wing, pulled back and tied low at the nape of his neck. He wore a buckskin vest over a simple calico shirt that had seen better days, and rough canvas trousers tucked into knee-high moccasins. He was Apache. Even a girl from Boston knew that much from the dime novels, though the reality was far more imposing than any drawing. The space around him was empty. The townsfolk gave him a wide berth, their eyes sliding over him with a mixture of fear and disdain. "Move it, Injun mutt," a burly man with a thick mustache muttered as he brushed past, deliberately bumping the Apache's shoulder. The dark-haired man did not flinch. He did not even look at the man who had insulted him. He was essentially a statue carved from desert rock. But then, his head turned slowly, and his eyes locked onto Cora. They were dark eyes, intelligent and unblinking. They were not the polite, averted eyes of gentlemen in a parlor. They were the eyes of a hawk spotting a field mouse. He looked at her, taking in the gray dress, the tight grip on the valise, the pale, terrified face. It was a look that lasted a heartbeat too long to be decent, stripping away her pretense of composure. Cora shivered, despite the heat. She looked away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Miss Ellison?" The voice was smooth, like molasses dripping from a spoon. Cora turned to see a man standing at the entrance of what appeared to be the post office and general store combination. He was dressed in a suit that was too fine for this dust, with a gold watch chain glinting across a silk vest. His face was round, his mustache waxed, and his smile did not reach his pale blue eyes. "I am Silas McGraw," he said, extending a hand that looked soft and manicured. "Welcome to Esperanza Gulch, my dear. I handled your correspondence." Cora took his hand tentatively. "Mr. McGraw, it is a pleasure. Is Mr. Henderson here?" Silas's smile tightened just a fraction. "Come inside, Miss Ellison. Out of this heat, we have some matters to discuss." A cold knot of dread formed in Cora's stomach. She followed him into the dim interior of the building. It smelled of dry paper and tobacco. Inside, sitting behind a heavy oak desk, Silas gestured for her to sit. He remained standing, dominating the space. "There has been an unfortunate turn of events," Silas began, his voice dropping to a tone of practiced mournfulness. "Mr. Henderson passed away 3 weeks ago. A riding accident, a tragedy. Truly." The world tilted on its axis. Cora gripped the arms of the wooden chair. "Dead, but I am here. I have spent every cent I have to get here." I know," Silas soothed, though his eyes were calculating, assessing her face, her figure. "It is a terrible predicament. However, the contract regarding your arrival was flexible. The agency fee and your travel expenses were substantial. Mr. Henderson had not yet paid them in full when he died. I cannot pay you back," Cora whispered. Panic rose in her chest, hot and suffocating. "I have $5 to my name. No need for distress," Silas said, waving a hand. "The debt has been settled." "Another party has stepped forward to honor the contract. He has paid your passage and the agency fee. You are, legally speaking, his bride now." "Who?" Cora asked, looking around the empty office. "Who would do that?" The door to the street opened, letting in a blinding rectangle of white light. The tall Apache man from the platform stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Silas smirked. "Miss Ellison, meet Nayati James. He is a local, rancher." Cora stood up, her legs trembling. She looked from the smiling, oily face of Silas McGraw to the stoic, scarred face of the Apache warrior. "Him, but surely there is a mistake." "No mistake." Nayati spoke for the first time. His voice was deep, rough like gravel grinding together, and his English was crisp, lacking the lazy drawl of the townsfolk. "The paper is signed." "You signed for me?" Cora asked, her voice rising in hysteria. Like a sack of flour. "I paid a debt," Nayati said, his eyes never leaving Silas. "One life for another. The books are balanced now." "McGraw." "Indeed they are." "Nayati." Silas chuckled, leaning back against his desk. "Though I dare say you got the better end of the bargain. She is a pretty thing. Isn't she? A bit pale for work, but I suppose you have other uses in mind." Cora felt the blood drain from her face. The insinuation was crude, sharp, and it tore at the scabs of her memory. She was back in the parlor in Boston, hearing the rich man laugh as he locked the door. "You are just a pretty thing. Cora, stop fighting." "I will not," Cora said, her voice shaking. "I will not marry him. I will not go with him." Silas sighed, a sound of exaggerated patience. "Miss Ellison, look at the contract." He tapped a piece of paper on the desk. "It says you agree to marry the holder of this bond upon arrival. If you refuse, you are liable for the cost of the ticket. That is $85, plus the agency fee of $50. Can you pay that?" No," she whispered. "Then you are in breach of contract," Silas said coldly. "And in this territory, we have laws against fraud. The sheriff is a good friend of mine. I could have you arrested before sunset. Or..." He paused, letting his gaze rake over her. "I own a saloon down the street, the Golden Slipper. I'm always looking for girls to entertain the guests. You could work off your debt there. It might take you 5 or 6 years." Cora stepped back, bumping into a shelf of dry goods. The choice was a knife to the throat. Prison, prostitution, or this stranger. The door opened again, and a man with a tin star pinned to his vest walked in. He was sweating, his shirt stained at the armpits. This was the sheriff. He looked at Nayati with open hostility, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol, then looked at Cora. "Everything all right here, Mr. McGraw?" the sheriff asked. "Just explaining the law to the young lady," Silas said. The sheriff looked at Cora. "Listen here. Miss, you are a long way from home. If you don't have a husband and you don't have money, you are a vagrant. And if you don't honor a contract, you are a criminal. If you don't go with him." He jerked his head toward Nayati. "I can't guarantee your safety in this town. A woman alone? Well, things happen." It was a threat, a clear, naked threat. Cora looked at Nayati. He had not moved. He had not defended her against Silas's crude words. He had not offered comfort. He simply stood there, waiting. But in his eyes, she saw something that was absent in Silas and the sheriff. She saw no lust. She saw no cruelty. She saw a strange, weary resignation. He was looking at her not as a prize, but as a burden he had chosen to carry. "Why?" Cora asked him, her voice barely audible. "Why did you pay for me?" "Because he would have sold you to the saloon an hour after you arrived," Nayati said. His face remained impassive. "And no one deserves that cage." The words struck her. He knew, somehow. He looked at Silas and saw the monster she sensed. Cora looked down at her hands. The scar on her wrist burned. In Boston, she was damaged goods. Here, she was property. But this man, this stranger who the town despised, was the only one offering her a door that did not lead to a cell or a brothel. "I have conditions," she said, though she knew she had no leverage. Nayati tilted his head slightly. She could not say it, not in front of these men. Nayati seemed to understand. He stepped closer, and for the first time, she smelled him leather, sage, and horse, not the stale alcohol smell of the town. "We will sign the paper," Nayati said to Silas. "Give it here." Silas pushed the document forward. Nayati signed his name in a strong, angular hand. He handed the pen to Cora. She hesitated for a second, the nib of the pen hovering over the paper. Then, with a breath that felt like breathing in broken glass, she signed Cora Ellison. "Excellent," Silas said, snatching the paper back. "I pronounce you, well, bound. Get her out of my office, Nayati. She is your problem now." Nayati turned and walked out the door without looking back. Cora grabbed her valise and scrambled to follow, terrified of being left alone with Silas even for a moment. Outside, the heat hit her again, but now it felt different, heavier. Nayati walked toward two horses tied to a rail. One was a massive paint horse, clearly his. The other was a smaller mare, gentle-looking but sturdy. He stopped and turned to her. The street was watching them. Women peered from behind curtains. Men on the boardwalk stopped talking to stare. The scandal was palpable in the air. A white woman, a lady from the east, going off with an Apache. "Listen to me," Nayati said, his voice low so only she could hear. "We go to the justice of the peace to make the paper legal so the sheriff cannot touch you. Then we go to my land." Cora clutched her valise to her chest. "And then?" "And then," Nayati said, his dark eyes searching hers. "You take the spare room. You sleep alone. I do not touch you. You work the house. I work the land. When the harvest comes, if we make money, or if I can sell some horses, I will give you half. Then you can buy a ticket to wherever you want to go. San Francisco, Denver, away." Cora stared at him, stunned. You do not want a wife." A shadow passed over his face, a flicker of old pain that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "I want to be left alone. Miss Ellison, Silas McGraw wanted to turn you into a whore to spite the memory of the man you were supposed to marry. I stopped him. That is all." He took the reins of the mare and held them out to her. "Can you ride?" I have ridden in a park. Side saddle," she stammered. Nayati looked at her dress, then at the western saddle. "We have 20 miles to ride before dark. You will learn." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion, towering above her. He looked down, and for a moment, the harshness of his face softened. "I am not a white man. Cora, I do not take what is not given. You are safe from me." Safe. It was a word she had not believed in for 2 years. She looked back at the post office. Silas was watching from the window, a smirk on his face. She looked at the sheriff, who was lighting a cigar on the porch, watching her with cold indifference. Then she looked at Nayati. He was an outcast, a savage in the eyes of these people, but he was the only one who had spoken to her with truth. Cora reached out and took the reins. She awkwardly put her foot in the stirrup, hoisting herself up, the dress bunched up, exposing her ankles, but she did not care. She settled into the saddle, feeling the beast shift beneath her. "Let us go," she said, her voice finding a sudden, unexpected steel. Nayati nodded once. He clicked his tongue, and his horse moved forward. They rode down the main street of Esperanza Gulch. The sound of hoofbeats on hard-packed earth echoed against the wooden buildings. Cora felt the eyes of the town on her back, hundreds of needles pricking her skin. She kept her chin high, refusing to look down, refusing to show the tears that threatened to spill. As they passed the last building, a small clinic with a sign that read, "Dr. Harlan, Medicine Surgery." An older man with gray hair and kind eyes stepped out onto the porch. He took off his hat as they passed, nodding respectfully to Nayati, and then offering a sad, sympathetic bow to Cora. Beside the clinic stood a woman with dark skin and a colorful shawl. Sweeping the steps of a boarding house, Maria Reyes. She paused, crossing herself as she watched them pass. Then the town was behind them. Ahead lay the open desert. It was vast, terrifying, and beautiful. The red rocks jutted up like the bones of the earth. The sky was a bruising purple as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Cora rode behind the Apache warrior. A stranger she was now bound to by law and debt. The rhythm of the horse jarred her bones, but as the distance between her and the town grew, the suffocating knot in her chest loosened just a fraction. She was no longer a mail-order bride waiting to be collected. She was no longer the ruined girl from Boston. She was something else now, something undefined. She watched Nayati's back, the way he moved in sync with his horse, his head turning constantly to scan the horizon. He was a creature of this wild land. "I do not take what is not given," he had said. Cora touched the scar on her wrist one last time, then let her hand drop to the saddle horn. She would hold him to that promise. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and cooling sand. They rode into the long shadow of the canyon, leaving the civilized world behind, riding toward a destiny that was as uncertain as the coming night. The journey into the desert was a descent into a world Cora Ellison had never imagined, even in her darkest nightmares or her most hopeful dreams. The sun, a relentless copper coin nailed to the sky, beat down upon them with a physical weight. The 20 miles Nayati had spoken of felt like 20 lifetimes. Every step the mare took sent a jolt of pain up Cora's spine. Her Boston dress, heavy and restrictive, was a prison of sweat and dust. She clung to the saddle horn with cramping fingers, her eyes fixed on the broad back of the Apache warrior riding ahead. He moved with the land, his body swaying in perfect rhythm with his massive paint horse, while she felt like a sack of grain tied precariously to a beast she did not understand. The landscape shifted from the scrubby flatlands around Esperanza Gulch to a chaotic, majestic terrain of red sandstone and jagged peaks. The silence here was profound, broken only by the scrape of horseshoes on stone and the dry whisper of the wind through the sagebrush. As the sun began to bleed into the western horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and bruised orange, the wind picked up. It was not a cooling breeze, but a hot breath carrying grit that stung her cheeks. Nayati pulled his horse to a halt near a cluster of boulders. He dismounted with fluid grace and walked back toward her. "Drink," he said, holding up a leather canteen. Cora stared at his hand. It was large, the skin dark and weathered, scarred from labor and perhaps violence. As he reached up to offer the canteen, his fingers brushed against her gloved hand. Cora flinched so violently she nearly lost her seat. A gasp tore from her throat, and she yanked her hand back as if burned. The memory of another hand heavy, smelling of brandy and entitlement flashed through her mind, paralyzing her. Nayati froze. He did not pull away, nor did he apologize. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his brow. He lowered the canteen slowly, placing it on her saddle horn without touching her again. "The water is for you," he said, his voice devoid of judgment, The coyote calls soon. We must ride. He turned his back and walked to his horse. Cora stared at the canteen, her chest heaving. She was trembling, not from the cold that was creeping in with the twilight, but from the shame of her own fear. He had done nothing but offer water, yet her body remembered trauma as if it were happening in the present tense. She drank greedily, the warm water tasting of leather, and steeled herself. They rode on as the light failed, the temperature plummeted, and the desert came alive with sounds that made Cora's blood run cold. The yipping and howling of coyotes echoed off the canyon walls, sounding like the laughter of madmen. She urged her mare closer to Nayate's paint horse, terrified of the darkness stretching out on all sides. It was fully night when they reached the ranch. It was not the sprawling estate she had read about in novels. It was a humble, solitary existence carved out of the wilderness. A small cabin built of rough-hewn logs sat in the shelter of a limestone overhang. Nearby, a corral held 2 other horses, and a small patch of corn stalks rustled in the wind. A figure emerged from the cabin, carrying a lantern. It was an older man, his face a map of deep wrinkles, his hair gray and braided. He wore traditional Apache clothing, worn but clean. This was Atsa. Nayate dismounted and spoke to the old man in a language that sounded to Cora like water flowing over stones, guttural, rhythmic, and strange. Atsa looked at Cora. He raised the lantern, illuminating her pale, dust-streaked face. He said something short, his tone sharp. Nayate turned to Cora and offered a hand to help her down. This time, she forced herself to take it, though her muscles remained rigid. Her legs nearly gave way when she hit the ground, numb from the ride. Atsa asks if I have brought a ghost. Nayate translated, his mouth twitching with the ghost of a smile. He says you look like you will break if the wind blows too hard. I'm stronger than I look, Cora managed to say, though her voice was a rasp. We shall see, Nayate replied. Come, eat. The interior of the cabin was sparse but clean. A fire burned in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. There were dried herbs hanging from the rafters, filling the air with a pungent, earthy scent. Atsa served them a stew of rabbit and corn, watching Cora with dark, inquisitive eyes. As they ate, the silence stretched. Finally, Atsa spoke in broken English, addressing the air rather than Cora directly. He brings trouble, Atsa grunted, nodding toward Nayate. Always, he walked along a path between 2 mountains. Rock fell on him from both sides. Cora looked at Nayate. What does he mean? Nayate did not look up from his bowl. I was a scout for the army. For 3 years, I tracked my own people who refused the reservation. I thought I was keeping the peace. I thought if I helped the soldiers, they would treat us with honor. He paused, his jaw tightening. I was wrong. The army lied. My people called me a traitor. The white men called me a savage. Atsa is the only one who still opens his door to me. He looked at Cora then, his gaze intense. You are in a house of outcasts. Miss Ellison, there is no honor here for you to borrow. Cora felt a pang of unexpected kinship. I have no honor left to lose. Mr. James. Later, Nayate showed her to a small room at the back of the cabin. It was separated from the main room by a heavy blanket hung as a curtain. Inside, there was a simple cot with a straw mattress and a pile of thick wool blankets. This is yours, Nayate said, standing at the threshold. I sleep by the fire. You are safe here. He turned to leave, but then paused. Rest well. Wife. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Wife. It triggered something violent in Cora. The fatigue, the fear, the shame, it all crested like a wave. She stood by the cot, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. Do not call me that, she whispered, her voice trembling. Nayate turned back, his brow furrowed. It is what the paper says. The paper is a lie, Cora cried out, the tears finally spilling over. You paid for a bride. You paid for a woman to start a life with. You think you bought a fresh start. She took a step back, her back hitting the rough log wall. The shame burned her throat. He had saved her from Silas. Yes, but he was a man. Men wanted things. Men expected things. And when they found out the merchandise was damaged, their kindness turned to rage. She had seen it in her father's eyes. She had seen it in the eyes of the neighbors in Boston. "I am not what you think I am," she choked out. I am not. She could not say the words. I am not pure. I am not whole. Nayati watched her, his stillness a stark contrast to her trembling. He did not step closer. He did not demand an explanation. He seemed to look right through her skin to the terrified creature hiding beneath. "I think you are a woman who is tired," Nayati said softly. "And I think you are a woman who is afraid. I did not buy a horse. Cora, I paid a debt to keep a human being free. I expect nothing from you but your word that you will not run into the desert and die." He reached out and pulled the blanket curtain closed, leaving her alone in the dark. Cora sank onto the cot, pulling her knees to her chest. She sobbed silently into the wool, the smell of sage and wood smoke surrounding her. He did not know. He did not know the rot she carried inside, and the terror that he would one day find out and cast her out into the wilderness was a cold stone in her stomach. 20 miles away, in the smoky office behind the Golden Slipper Saloon, Silas McGraw poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey. The sounds of a piano and drunken laughter drifted in from the barroom. But in here, the air was thick with conspiracy. The sheriff sat opposite him, looking uncomfortable. He spun his hat in his hands. "I do not like it. Silas," the sheriff muttered. "Nayati is a wild card. He has killed men for less than this. And the girl, she signed the paper." Silas took a sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. "She signed a paper under duress. Sheriff, a good lawyer could argue she was coerced. But we do not need a lawyer yet. We need leverage." He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a ledger. He flipped through the pages until he found the entry for Cora Ellison. $85 for transport, $50 for the agency. Silas read. Nayati paid it, true, but he paid it on the assumption of a valid contract transfer. Now, look at this. He pointed to a fine print clause at the bottom of the shipping manifest. All goods and persons transported remain the liability of the agency until final delivery is confirmed by a witnessed consummation or a period of 30 days residence. "It is a shipping clause," the sheriff said. Frowning. "For cattle. It is a clause for property," Silas corrected, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "And legally. She is property in transit. If that marriage is not real, and we both know a Boston lily like that is not letting a savage into her bed, then the contract is voidable. I can claim she was delivered to the wrong recipient. I can claim he kidnapped her by fraud." "You want the girl that bad?" the sheriff asked. "I want what is mine," Silas snapped. "And I want Nayati James broken. He thinks he cleared his ledger with me. He owes me for the scouts he led into that canyon 5 years ago. He owes me to my brother." Silas slammed the ledger shut. "Ride out there tomorrow. Tell him the territory judge is coming through next week. Tell him if he cannot prove that marriage is valid in every sense, I will have the marriage annulled and the girl returned to my custody as unclaimed freight. Then we will see how high the Apache holds his head." The morning sun at the ranch was deceptive. It looked gentle, painting the red rocks in soft pinks. But the heat rose quickly. Cora had barely slept. She emerged from her room with dark circles under her eyes, wearing her gray dress which now looked hopelessly out of place. Atsa was already working in the corn patch. Nayati was by the corral, checking the hoof of the paint horse. The sound of hoofbeats approaching made Nayati straighten. He reached for the rifle leaning against the fence, his movement casual but practiced. A rider appeared over the ridge. It was not the sheriff. To Cora's immense relief, it was the older man she had seen in town, Dr. Harlan. The doctor rode a mule that looked as stubborn as its rider. He dismounted stiffly, dusting off his coat. "Morning, Nayati," Dr. Harlan said, tipping his hat. "Atsa." He turned his gaze to Cora. "And Mrs. James, I presume I came to check on you. That ride yesterday was enough to break a seasoned cowboy, let alone a lady from the coast. I'm fine. Doctor," Cora said, though her voice was thin. She is alive, Nayati said, leaning on the fence. Why are you really here? Harlan, you do not ride 20 miles for a house call unless someone is dying. The doctor's face grew serious. He tied his mule to the rail and walked closer to Nayati, lowering his voice. Silas is moving against you, Dr. Harlan said bluntly. I heard him and the sheriff talking last night. He is going to challenge the marriage. Nayati, he is digging up old property laws. He claims that if the marriage is not consummated and proven, she is considered returned goods. He plans to come here with a warrant to take her back to the Golden Slipper. Cora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The blood drained from her face. He can do that. In this territory, the law is written by the man with the most money, the doctor said grimly. Silas wants to humiliate you, Nayati, and he sees Miss Ellison as a way to do it. Nayati's eyes went cold. He looked at the horizon, his jaw working. He wants a war. He wants you to fight so he can hang you, the doctor warned. If you shoot a sheriff's deputy trying to execute a warrant, you are a dead man. You need to be smart about this. The doctor stayed for an hour, checking Cora's pulse and leaving a tin of salve for her blistered hands, then rode back toward town. He left behind a silence that was heavier than the heat. Cora stood on the porch of the cabin, hugging her arms around herself. The vast landscape that had seemed majestic earlier now felt like a cage. Silas could reach her even here. There was no escape. Nayati walked up the steps. He took off his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked tired. Pack your things, Nayati said quietly. Cora looked up, startled. What? I will give you a horse. I will give you all the money I have hidden under the floorboards. It is not much, but it will get you to Santa Fe. You can take the train from there. You are sending me away. I am giving you a chance, Nayati said. He turned to face her, and for the first time, he stepped into her personal space. He did not touch her, but his presence was overwhelming. If you stay, Silas will come. He will drag you into court. He will shame you. He will try to take you back to his brothel. I cannot stop the law without becoming a criminal myself. If I fight them, I die. If I die, there is no one to protect you. Cora stared at him. And if I run? Then they will hunt you, Nayati admitted. But you might make it. It was a terrible choice. Run into the wilderness alone, a woman with no skills, hunted like an animal, or stay and face a monster who viewed her as property. She looked at Nayati. He was offering her the only thing he had left, his savings and a horse. He was willing to lose everything to give her a slim chance at freedom. Why? She asked again. Why do you care? Because I know what it is to be owned, Nayati said, his voice rough. I know what it is to have your humanity stripped away by a piece of paper. Cora looked out at the red dust. She thought of the scar on her wrist. She thought of running, of always running, always looking over her shoulder. She was tired of running. She looked back at Nayati. He was strong, yes, but he was alone, as he was fighting a war against the whole world. No, Cora said. Nayati blinked. No, I will not run, Cora said, her voice gaining strength. I ran from Boston. I ran halfway across the continent. I am done running. She took a step toward him. If I leave, Silas wins. He proves that you are just a savage who could not keep a wife. He proves that I am just goods to be shuffled around. I will not give him that satisfaction. Cora, Nayati said, using her name for the first time without the title. This will be hard. They will say terrible things about you. They will say you are a whore for an Indian. They already say that, Cora said, lifting her chin. Let them talk, but I will not be property. Not yours, not his. She took a deep breath. Dr. Harlan said they need to prove the marriage is real. Then we make it real, not in the dark, she added quickly. Flushing, but in the daylight, we stand together. We work this land together. We make this ranch succeed. We make it so undeniable that no judge in the territory can sign that warrant without shaming himself. Nayati studied her face. He saw the fear there. Yes, but he also saw a spark of fire that matched the harsh, beautiful land around them. You are suggesting an alliance. Nayati said slowly. I am suggesting we fight, Cora replied. Together. Nayati watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. A look of respect replaced the pity in his eyes. Very well, he said. If you stay, I will fight to the last breath to ensure no one owns you, not Silas and not me. Then it is agreed, Cora said. It is agreed, Nayati replied. He turned to look out at the darkening horizon, where the storm clouds were gathering over the mountains. The war had begun, but for the first time in years. Nayati James was not fighting it alone, and Cora Ellison, the ruined girl from Boston, had planted her feet in the red dust and refused to move. The days at the ranch did not pass. They ground forward like a millstone, crushing the soft edges of Cora Ellison's former life into dust. The first week was a lesson in humiliation. Cora learned that a Boston education was useless when faced with a goat that refused to be milked. She sat on a three-legged stool, her gray dress pinned up awkwardly around her knees, wrestling with a stubborn nanny goat named Bessie. Atsa watched from the shade of the porch, smoking a pipe, his eyes crinkling with silent amusement as the goat kicked over the pail for the third time that morning. But Cora did not cry. She simply picked up the pail, wiped the mud from her cheek, and started again. By the second week, the bruising on her legs from the saddle began to fade into calluses. Nayati taught her to shoot an old Winchester rifle. He did not treat her like a porcelain doll. He placed the heavy stock against her shoulder, adjusted her stance with impersonal hands, and told her to fire. When the recoil nearly knocked her into the dirt, he did not laugh. Again, he said, the coyote does not care if your shoulder hurts. So she fired again and again, until the smell of gunpowder felt more natural to her than the scent of lavender water. Life settled into a rhythm. In the evenings, while Nayati repaired the shingles on the roof or mended fences, Cora sat by the fire mending his shirts. They were intimate acts of domesticity performed by two strangers who barely spoke. Yet, in the silence, a fragile thread began to weave between them. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the ridge. Cora froze, her hand instinctively going to the rifle leaning against the doorframe, but Atsa merely grunted and continued grinding corn. It was a woman. She rode astride like a man, wearing buckskins and a wide-brimmed hat. Her hair was black and thick, hanging in two long braids. This was Tala, Nayati's cousin. She dismounted and spoke rapidly to Nayati in their native tongue. Nayati answered, his voice low. Then, Tala turned her gaze on Cora. It was a sharp, assessing look, stripping away the layers of Cora's defenses. So, Tala said, her English heavily accented but clear, this is the white bird. Her name is Cora, Nayati said quietly. Tala walked up the steps, ignoring Nayati. She stopped in front of Cora, looking her up and down. Can you skin a rabbit? No, Cora admitted. Can you find water in the dry season? No, Tala scoffed, crossing her arms. Useless. I can read, Cora said, a sudden spark of defiance flaring in her chest. And I can write. And I'm learning to shoot better than you. I wager. Tala's eyebrows shot up. A slow grin spread across her face. We shall see, white bird. We shall see. Later, while Nayati was checking the horses, Tala sat with Cora on the porch. The hostility had softened into a rough curiosity. He carries a heavy stone. That one, Tala said, nodding toward Nayati. Does the white girl know what wounds he hides? He was a scout, Cora said. He told me he feels he betrayed his people. It is not just betrayal, Tala said, her voice dropping. It is the ghosts. He saw the army butcher a camp he had sworn was safe. Women, children. He hears their screams when the sky rumbles. Be careful with him. He is strong like iron, but iron breaks if you strike it wrong. Cora looked at Nayati, who was silhouetted against the setting sun. She realized then how little she knew of the man who slept on the floor outside her room every night to keep her safe. The truth of Tala's warning came 3 nights later. A summer storm rolled in from the mountains, violent and sudden. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters of the cabin. Cora was in the kitchen, cutting bread for supper, Nayati was seated at the table, cleaning his gun. A crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the earth, so loud it felt as if the roof had been torn off. Behind her, Cora heard a clatter. She turned to see the gun parts scattered across the floor. Nayati was not in his chair. He was pressed back into the corner of the room, his knees drawn up, his hands covering his ears. His eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on a horror that was not there. He was shaking, a violent tremor that rattled his entire frame. "Nayati?" Cora whispered. Another crack of thunder split the air. Nayati flinched as if he had been whipped. He let out a low, guttural sound, a sound of pure agony. Cora's heart broke. This was not the stoic warrior. This was a man trapped in a nightmare. Without thinking, she crossed the room. She knelt in front of him, heedless of the gun oil staining her dress. She did not touch him. She sensed that a touch might shatter him, but she placed her hands on the floorboards near his boots, anchoring herself in his space. "Nayati," she said, her voice firm and low, cutting through the noise of the storm. "Look at me. It is just thunder. You are at the ranch. You are safe." His eyes darted frantically. "Seeing blood. Seeing fire." "Nayati," she commanded softly. "Look at the fire. Look at me." Slowly, agonizingly. His gaze focused. He blinked, the present moment rushing back in. He saw Cora kneeling before him, her eyes filled not with fear of him, but with fear for him. He took a ragged breath, his hands lowering from his ears. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He swallowed hard. "The noise." "I know," Cora said gently. "It is over now. The rain is coming." She stayed there until his breathing steadied. She did not ask questions. She did not offer pity. She simply witnessed his pain and did not turn away. In that moment, the dynamic between them shifted. He was no longer just her protector. He was a man who bled, and she was the one holding the bandage. The heat of the summer intensified. One afternoon, Cora took the mule down to the creek to fetch water for the laundry. The creek was hidden by a thicket of willows, a private oasis in the red dust. As she pushed through the branches, she stopped dead. Nayati was there. He was standing waist-deep in the water, his back to her. He was bathing. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, dappling his skin. For the first time, Cora saw him without the armor of his buckskins. His back was a landscape of muscle and scars. There were old, silver lines from knives, and round, puckered marks from bullets. But what held her breath hostage was the sheer power of him, the way the water slicked over his shoulders, the way his dark hair clung to his neck. A sudden, sharp heat coiled in Cora's belly. It was a sensation she had not felt in years, and never like this. In Boston, intimacy had been a duty, and later, a terror. But this was a pull, magnetic and undeniable. She watched him for a second too long. Then, shame crashed over her like a bucket of ice water. "You are broken," the voice in her head hissed. "You are soiled. How dare you look at him with want? How dare you imagine his hands on you when you are ruined?" She stepped back, a twig snapping under her boot. Nayati spun around, crouching instantly, water splashing. When he saw it was her, he relaxed slightly, though he remained submerged. His eyes locked onto hers across the distance. I'm sorry," Cora stammered, her face burning. "I did not know." She turned and fled back up the path, her heart pounding with a confusing mix of desire and self-loathing. She spent the rest of the day scrubbing the floors until her knuckles were raw, trying to scour the image of him from her mind. That night, she dreamed. She dreamed of the cabin, but it was warm and smelled of sage. She dreamed of strong arms wrapping around her, not to hurt, but to hold. She dreamed of a voice whispering against her ear, "You are safe." She woke up gasping, her body flushed, her sheets tangled around her legs. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind, and felt a profound, aching loneliness. The wall between her room and the main area felt thin. She knew he was just on the other side, sleeping by the hearth. The distance between them was measured in inches. but the chasm was miles deep, dug by her own shame. 2 days later, the sky opened up again. It was a steady, soaking rain that turned the red dust into slick clay. Nayati suggested they check the herd in the south pasture, worried the creek might flood. Cora rode the mare, feeling more confident now, but the ground was treacherous. As they navigated a narrow trail along a ridge, a rattlesnake, seeking higher ground from the rain, struck out from beneath a sagebrush. The mare panicked. She reared, her hooves slipping on the wet clay. Cora lost her stirrup. The world spun. She felt herself sliding backward, the ground rushing up to meet her. "Cora!" Nayati's voice was a roar. Before she hit the rocks, a hand clamped onto her arm. He had brought his paint horse alongside hers in a dangerous maneuver, leaning out of his saddle to catch her. He hauled her up, dragging her across the gap between the horses until she was seated in front of him on his saddle. He held her tight against his chest, his heart hammering against her back like a trapped bird. "I have you," he breathed into her hair. "I have you." They rode back to the cabin in the pouring rain, leaving the mare to follow. Nayati did not let her go. Inside, they were both soaked to the bone. The fire had burned down to embers. Nayati set her down gently, then moved to build up the flames. Cora stood shivering, water dripping from her skirt, her teeth chattering. But it was not just the cold. It was the adrenaline. It was the feeling of his arms around her. Nayati turned back to her. The firelight cast his face in sharp relief. He looked at her, really looked at her, his eyes dark and searching. He stepped closer. "You are shaking," he said. He reached out to unbutton her heavy, soaked coat. His fingers grazed her throat. Cora gasped. The sensation was electric. She looked up at him, and she saw it the same heat she had felt at the creek, mirrored in his eyes. He wanted her. Panic flared, hot and bright. He wanted her, but he did not know. He did not know that she was used. He did not know that another man had already taken what should have been given freely. If he found out, the look in his eyes would turn to disgust. He would see her as Silas saw her, as damaged goods. She pulled away, stumbling back against the table. "No!" she cried out. Nayati froze, his hands raised, palms up. "Cora, I will not—" "You do not know," she sobbed, the dam finally breaking. The secret she had carried from Boston, the shame that had weighed down every step, came pouring out. "I am no virgin," she moaned, the words torn out like a wound reopening. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make herself small, trying to hide. They took that from me long before this. I am not new. I am not clean." She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the silence, waiting for him to tell her to get out, waiting for him to say that the contract was void because the merchandise was flawed. Silence stretched. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the rain on the roof. Then she felt a touch. It was not a grab. It was a gentle warmth. Nayati's hand cupped her chin, lifting her face. She opened her eyes, blurred with tears. Nayati was not looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her with a fierce, sorrowful tenderness. He thumbed away a tear that tracked down her cheek. "Still mine," he said softly, with a small, steady smile that broke her heart and put it back together. "In bed tonight, if you want it, not as something bought. As something chosen." Cora stared at him, her breath hitching. You do not care. The past is a ghost." "Cora," Nayati said, "it cannot touch us here unless we let it. I have scars on my skin. You have scars on your soul. They are just marks of survival. They do not change who you are." He stepped back, giving her space, giving her the power. He walked to the pile of furs by the hearth and laid them out. He sat down, leaning back against the stones, and turned his gaze to the fire, offering her his profile. He was waiting, but he was not demanding. Cora stood there, the water dripping from her hair. She looked at the man who had ridden through a storm to save her, who had faced down a sheriff for her, and who now offered her the one thing she had never had a choice. Slowly, with trembling fingers. She unbuttoned her wet dress. It fell to the floor with a heavy, sodden sound. She stood in her chemise, feeling the warmth of the fire on her skin. She walked across the room. Nayati did not turn until she was standing beside him. He looked up, and the raw worship in his eyes made her knees weak. "Stay," she whispered. She sank down onto the furs beside him. She reached out and took his hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, calloused palm against soft skin, a lock more binding than any chain. Nayati pulled a dry blanket over them both. He did not rush. He simply held her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles, as the firelight danced on the walls and the rain washed the world clean outside. The morning sun was bright and unforgiving, but when Cora looked in the small, cracked mirror hanging by the wash basin, the woman staring back did not look away. Her eyes were clear. The shadows of shame that had haunted her expression for 2 years were gone, burned away by the warmth of the night. She was still Cora. She still had the scar on her wrist, but the weight was gone. She walked out onto the porch. Nayati was chopping wood. He paused when he saw her. He did not smirk. He did not boast. He simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of the bond that now existed between them. "Coffee is ready," he said. "Thank you," she replied. It was simple. It was domestic, but it was everything. Her body was no longer a crime scene. It was hers again, because she had shared it with someone who treated it like a sanctuary. But the piece of the ranch was a fragile bubble. Later that day, while Cora was helping Atza shell corn, a rider approached. It was a young Mexican boy, the son of Maria Reyes. He rode fast, his horse lathered. He did not dismount. He simply handed a folded piece of paper to Cora and wheeled his horse around, galloping back toward town as if the devil were at his heels. Cora unfolded the paper. Her hands began to shake. "My dear Cora, Silas knows. The town is talking. They say the white bride is lying with the Apache savage. Silas is telling everyone that Nayati has bewitched you or forced you. He is gathering men. He says it is a matter of moral decency now. He is going to bring the law. And if the law does not work, he will bring the mob. You are not just a runaway bride anymore. Chula, you are a symbol, and Silas means to burn it down. Be ready. Maria." Cora lowered the letter. The wind kicked up the red dust, swirling around her ankles. She looked at Nayati, who was watching her from the corral. She had thought the battle was won because she had conquered her own demons. She realized now that the war had only just shifted fronts. She was no longer fighting for her soul. She was fighting for their lives. The town of Esperanza Gulch could tolerate a mail-order bride, and it could tolerate an Apache, but it would not tolerate them together. She walked toward Nayati. The letter crunched in her fist. She was no longer the girl who had stepped off the train terrified of her own shadow. She was a woman who had made a choice, and she would defend it with the rifle she had learned to use. "Nayati," she called out, her voice ringing clear across the yard. "We have trouble." Nayati stopped his work. He looked at the dust cloud rising in the direction of the town. His face set into the hard lines of the warrior she had first seen on the platform. "Then we prepare," he said. The honeymoon, such as it was over. The siege was about to begin. The dust cloud on the horizon was not a storm. It was distinct, brown, and moving with the purposeful speed of riders who knew exactly where they were going. Cora stood on the porch, her hand shading her eyes against the glare of the midday sun. The rifle Nayati had taught her to use leaned against the doorframe, a cold steel comfort. Nayati was in the corral, but he had stopped moving. He stood perfectly still, watching the approaching riders, his body tense as a coiled spring. "Go inside," Nayati said, his voice carrying across the yard without shouting. "No," Cora replied. She smoothed the front of her work dress. It was stained with earth and sweat, no longer the pristine gray garment of a Boston lady. "This is my home too. I will not hide in the dark." Nayati looked at her, a flash of approval in his dark eyes. But he moved to stand on the porch steps. placing himself between her and the yard. 5 men rode in. They were not lawmen. They wore the dusters and low-slung holsters of hired guns, men who sold their violence for a daily wage. At the front was a man with a jagged scar running through his beard, a man Cora recognized from the shadows of the Golden Slipper Saloon. They pulled their horses up, kicking dust over the clean laundry Cora had hung on the line. "Lost your way?" Nayati asked. His voice was flat, devoid of fear. The scarred man spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground near Nayati's boot. "Not lost. Apache. Just doing a job. Mr. McGraw's concerned about his property. Heard rumors that the merchandise might be damaged." He looked up at Cora, his eyes raking over her with a slithering familiarity that made her skin crawl. "He sent us to do an inspection. Make sure the lady is being treated right. Maybe bring her back to town for a proper checkup." "She is my wife," Nayati said. "She is not merchandise, and you are trespassing." "Wife," the man laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "That is a mighty big word for a savage to use. I see a white woman and an Indian. In this territory, that usually means a kidnapping." The man swung down from his horse. 2 others followed suit. They walked toward the porch, their hands hovering near their guns. "We are just going to talk to the lady," the scared man said, stepping onto the first step. "Come here, darling. Let's see if you have any bruises under that dress." Nayati moved. It was a blur of motion, too fast for the eye to track. His knife was out, the blade gleaming in the sun. He did not strike, but the tip of the knife hovered an inch from the scarred man's throat. "Step back," Nayati warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. The other men drew their pistols, the hammers clicking back in unison. The air froze, violence hung by a thread. "Easy now," the scarred man said, though he sweated. He took a half-step back. "You kill me, Apache, and the whole town burns this shack down." One of the other men, younger and foolish, saw an opening. He lunged past Nayati, reaching for Cora's arm. "Come on, Missy. Don't make this hard." His dirty hand clamped onto Cora's wrist, right over the scar she had hidden for so long. Cora did not scream. She did not faint. The fear that had ruled her life for 2 years flared white-hot, but it forged into something harder. Rage. She planted her feet. With her free hand, she swung. It was not a slap of hysteria. It was a blow of intent. Her palm cracked across the man's face with the sound of a pistol shot. The force of it snapped his head back, and he stumbled, releasing her. "Do not touch me," Cora hissed. Her voice was not the whisper of a victim. It was the command of a woman who owned herself. "Get off my porch!" The young man stared at her, hand to his stinging cheek, stunned. The scarred man looked from Nayati's knife to Cora's blazing eyes. He saw something he had not expected, a united front. "Right," the scarred man muttered, backing down the stairs. "Have it your way, but the sheriff is coming tomorrow with a piece of paper. You can explain that slap to the judge." He mounted his horse. "This ain't over. James, Silas wants what he paid for." They rode off, leaving a silence that buzzed in Cora's ears. Her hand throbbed from the impact, but for the first time, the pain felt good. It felt like victory. Nayati sheathed his knife. He turned to look at her, and there was a new light in his eyes, a fierce, burning pride. "You have a heavy hand, wife," he said softly. "He touched me," Cora said, her breath still coming fast. "He will not touch you again," Nayati promised. "But they are right. The sheriff will come, and he will bring paper that makes their violence legal." The sheriff arrived the next morning, not with a posse, but with the cold, bureaucratic weight of the law. He stayed on his horse, keeping a safe distance from the cabin, holding up a document stamped with the territorial seal. "Cora Ellison," the sheriff called out. "I have a summons here. You are ordered to appear before the magistrate in Esperanza Gulch in 3 days to testify regarding the validity of your contract. Until then, you are remanded to the custody of the court." "I am married," Cora shouted back. "That is for the judge to decide," the sheriff replied. "Silas claims coercion and kidnapping. If you don't show, I have a warrant here for Nayati James, dead or alive, for the abduction of a white woman. He dropped the summons in the dirt. Don't make me come back with the cavalry. Nayati. When the sheriff was gone, the reality of their situation settled over the ranch like a shroud. The law was a trap. If Cora went to town, Silas would take her. If she stayed, they would kill Nayati. We cannot stay here, Nayati said, watching the dust settle. This house is a cage now. Where do we go? Cora asked. They will watch the roads to Santa Fe. We do not go to the white man's cities, Nayati said. He looked toward the jagged peaks of the Dragoon Mountains to the south. We go where the sheriff cannot follow. We go to the stronghold. Cora looked at the mountains. They were forbidding a fortress of stone. Your people, my people? Nayati said. They may not welcome me, but they will not turn away a woman in danger. It is the only place Silas is afraid to go. They packed within the hour. Cora took only what she could carry in saddlebags, ammunition, dried meat, a change of clothes, and the heavy ledger she had started keeping for the ranch. They left the cabin standing silent and empty, the corn rustling in the wind like a ghost. The journey into the mountains was an ordeal that made the ride from the train station seem like a carriage ride in the park. The terrain was brutal. They rode along narrow shelves of rock where one slip meant a fall of 500 feet. The sun baked the stone until the heat rose in shimmering waves. Cora rode the mare, her eyes fixed on the path. She did not complain. She drank sparingly. She watched where the horses placed their hooves. On the second day, the sky turned a bruised, greenish black. The air grew heavy and still. Storm, Atsa muttered, pointing a gnarled finger at the peaks. Water comes fast in the canyons. We need to reach the high shelf, Nayati said, urgency edging his voice. Ride. They pushed the horses, scrambling up a steep incline of loose shale. The rain hit them like a physical blow, a deluge that turned the dust to slick mud in seconds. Thunder echoed off the canyon walls, deafening and constant. Then came the roar. It sounded like a freight train barreling down the canyon floor. Flash flood, Nayati shouted over the wind. Higher go. They urged the horses up the slope. The water hit the bottom of the canyon, a wall of churning brown sludge, uprooting trees and smashing boulders. The spray soaked them instantly. Atsa's mule panicked. It slipped on a patch of wet slate, its hind legs going over the edge. Atsa shouted, sliding from the saddle, clutching at the reins. The mule scrambled, kicking, and Atsa lost his footing. He slid down the mud, toward the roaring water below. Nayati was too far ahead, fighting his own spooked paint horse. Cora was closest. She did not think. She did not freeze. She threw herself from her mare, landing hard in the mud. She scrambled on hands and knees, grabbing the back of Atsa's buckskin shirt just as his boots dangled over the lip of the floodwater. The current roared inches below him, hungry and violent. Atsa was heavy, dead weight in the slick mud. Hold on, Cora screamed, digging her boots into a crevice in the rock. Her muscles burned. The scar on her wrist throbbed, but her grip did not falter. She was not the weak girl from Boston. She was a woman of the West, forged in heat and dust. Pull! Nayati was there suddenly, grabbing Atsa's arm, hauling the old man up with a heave of massive strength. They collapsed onto the muddy shelf, panting, the rain pounding against their backs. Below them, the floodwaters raged, carrying away the debris of the desert. Atsa lay on his back, coughing. He looked up at Cora, his eyes wide. For months, he had looked at her with indifference or mild amusement. Now, there was something else. Respect. You have a strong grip, Atsa wheezed. For a white bird. Cora wiped the mud from her eyes. I am not a bird. Atsa, birds fly away. I am still here. Nayati looked at her, water streaming down his face. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder hard. It was not a caress. It was a warrior's acknowledgement. You are good, he said. They reached the stronghold 2 days later. It was a hidden valley, nestled high in the peaks, accessible only by a single twisting trail. As they rode in, The atmosphere changed. The smell of cedar smoke and roasting meat filled the air. Children stopped their games to watch. Women looked up from their weaving. Men stood, their hands resting on rifles. These were the people of the town of Esperanza Gulch called savages, monsters. Yet Cora saw families. She saw a mother nursing a baby. She saw an old man teaching a boy to string a bow. She saw a community holding on to existence by its fingernails. But the welcome was cold. A tall man with silver streaks in his hair stepped forward. He looked at Nayati with eyes like a flint. "You return, Nayati," the man said in English, clearly for Cora's benefit. "And you bring strangers. Is the army not far behind?" "No army," Nayati said, dismounting. He kept his head high, but his posture was submissive, palms open. "I brought my wife and my father. We seek shelter." "Wife!" The man looked at Cora with disdain. "A white woman. You bring the enemy into our hearts?" "She is no enemy," Nayati said firmly. "She is hunted by her own kind, just as we are." The man spat on the ground. "You wore the blue coat, Nayati. You led the soldiers. Now you bring a white woman. You are a ghost to us. You do not belong." Cora watched Nayati. She expected him to argue, to defend himself. Instead, he bowed his head. He took the insult. He absorbed the hatred of his own kin because he knew. Deep down, he believed he deserved it. "I am here now," Nayati said quietly. "I will not help them again. I ask only for a place to sleep. If the soldiers come, I will stand between them and you." The leader stared at him for a long time. Then he gestured vaguely to the edge of the camp. "Sleep with the dogs if you must, but do not expect us to feed you." They set up a small camp on the periphery. That night, as the fires burned low, Cora sat beside Nayati. "They hate you," she whispered, "because you tried to help." "Because I was blind," Nayati said, staring into the flames. "I thought if I showed the soldiers the trails, they would only catch the raiders. I did not know they would kill everyone. The blood of this valley is on my hands. Cora, I can never wash it off." Cora reached out and took his hand. "I blamed myself for what happened to me in Boston," she said. "I thought I was dirty. I thought I was invited to it. But we cannot carry the sins of other men forever. Nayati, you were deceived. That is not the same as being a traitor." Nayati looked at her, his eyes tortured. "You see forgiveness where there is none." "I see a good man," Cora said fiercely. "And I am not the only one." Over the next few days, the ice began to thaw, driven by curiosity. The Apache children, bold and inquisitive, crept closer to watch Cora. She did not shoo them away. She showed them the cat's cradle game with a piece of string. She helped a woman lift a heavy basket of clay. She did not act like a conqueror or a tourist. She acted like a neighbor. She saw the softness here that the town lacked. In Esperanza Gulch, eyes were always calculating profit. Here, eyes watched for safety, for family. The savages were more civilized than the men playing poker at the Golden Slipper. But the peace was short-lived. On the fourth day, a scout ran into the camp, shouting. The village erupted into organized chaos. The leader summoned Nayati. Cora followed, refusing to be left behind. "Your white brothers are coming," the leader snarled. "A posse, 30 men, heavily armed. They are moving up the lower canyon." "Silas?" Cora breathed. "They carry a banner," the scout said. "They say they come to rescue the white woman kidnapped by the renegade Nayati." The leader turned on Nayati, drawing his knife. "You brought this. They will burn us out to get to her. We should give her to them, or kill her and throw her body down so they leave." Nayati stepped in front of Cora, his hand on his revolver. "You will not touch her. They will slaughter us," the leader shouted. "There are women and children here." "If you give her up," Nayati said, "Silas will still attack. He hates you as much as he hates me. He just uses her as an excuse. If you kill her, the army will come and wipe this place off the map for murdering a white lady." The logic was cold and undeniable. The leader lowered his knife, shaking with rage. "Then what do? We fight, will we die? Nayati looked at the canyon walls. "We can hold the pass." "But not forever. 30 men with rifles. Many will die." Cora stepped forward. Her heart was hammering, but her mind was clear. She remembered the ledger. She remembered the contract. She remembered the arrogance of Silas McGraw. "No," Cora said. Her voice rang out, surprising the men. "We do not fight them here. We do not let them turn this valley into a graveyard." The leader looked at her with scorn. "Go back to your cooking fire, woman." "I know Silas McGraw," Cora said, stepping closer to the chief. "He is a coward. He uses the law because he is afraid of a fair fight. He is using the excuse of rescue to bring a massacre. But his power comes from that paper he holds, the contract." "Paper means nothing to a bullet." The leader grunted. "Paper means everything to the sheriff." Cora countered. "And to the governor. If I can prove that Silas is a criminal, that he forged the contract, that he is stealing women, then his posse loses its legal standing." "The sheriff will not fight for a man who is about to be hanged." Nayati looked at her. "Cora, what are you saying?" "I am saying we go back," Cora said, turning to him. "Not to the ranch, to the town, to Esperanza Gulch." "That is suicide," Nayati said. "It is a gambit," Cora corrected. "We rode down. We walk right into the middle of the town. In broad daylight, before Silas's men can get up here, we interrupt his little war party. I have the original letter from Mr. Henderson. I have the shipping dates. I can prove the signature on the transfer was faked." She looked at the Apache leader. "If we fight here, your children die. If we go to town, Nayati and I take the risk. If we fail, you are no worse off. But if we win, Silas is gone." The leader looked at Nayati. "She speaks with the tongue of a chieftain." Nayati looked at Cora. He saw the terror deep in her eyes, but it was buried under layers of resolve. She was willing to walk back into the lion's den to save people who had looked at her with hatred. "You are sure?" Nayati asked. "I am done running." Cora repeated her vow. "We go to town, and we take the fight to him. We will need a diversion," Nayati said, his mind shifting to tactics. "To get past his scouts." The Apache leader sheathed his knife. "My scouts will clear the path. We will watch from the ridges. If the white men shoot, then we will rain fire on them." It was a fragile alliance, born of desperation. "We leave now," Cora said, looking at the sun. "We need to be in the town square by noon tomorrow." She walked toward her mare, her hands steady. She was going back to the world of men who viewed her as property. But she was bringing a weapon they did not understand the truth, and an Apache warrior who had finally found something worth fighting for. The wind howled through the canyon, sounding like a war cry. The final confrontation was coming, and it would not be fought in the shadows of the mountains, but on the dusty main street where it all began. The sun hung at its zenith, a white-hot eye staring down judgmentally upon the dusty main street of Esperanza Gulch. The town was unusually quiet, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a tornado. But the storm approaching was not made of wind and rain. It was made of 4 riders coming down from the Dragoon Mountains. Silas McGraw stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the Golden Slipper Saloon. He was dressed for war, though his war was usually fought with other men's hands. He wore a fine linen suit, a holster strapped awkwardly over his hip, and a look of supreme confidence. Behind him stood the sheriff, looking sweating and pale, and a dozen hired guns, the posse that was meant to ride out within the hour to burn an Apache stronghold. But they did not need to ride. The target was coming to them. At the far end of the street, shimmering in the heat haze, the 4 figures emerged. Nayati rode his paint horse in the center, upright and unbowed. To his right was Cora, riding the mare, her chin lifted high, her gray dress stained with the red clay of the high country. Flanking them were Atsa and Tala, armed with rifles resting easily across their saddles. They did not ride like fugitives. They rode like conquerors. The townsfolk, sensing the shift in the air, began to spill out of the general store, the livery stable, and the houses. They gathered on the edges of the street, whispering, their eyes darting from the posse on the saloon porch to the small group advancing down the center of the road. Nayati raised a hand, and the group halted 20 yards from the saloon. The distance was close enough to speak, but far enough to make a pistol shot difficult for a nervous hand. "You saved me a trip. Savage!" Silas called out, his voice oily and loud, pitched for the audience. "I was just about to come fetch my property." He stepped down onto the first step of the stairs, asserting his dominance. "Sheriff, arrest that man for kidnapping, and secure the woman. She has had a trying ordeal, I am sure." The sheriff stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun belt. "Nayati James, you are under arrest for the abduction of Cora Ellison. Step down from the horse." "I was not abducted." Cora's voice rang out. It was clear, sharp, and carried to every ear in the crowd. She urged her mare forward, separating herself from Nayati. She rode until she was in the middle of the open space, between her husband and her tormentor. She looked down at Silas with a gaze that held none of the fear he remembered. "I went with my husband freely," Cora declared, "to escape a man who deals in flesh like a butcher deals in meat." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Silas's smile faltered for a second, then returned, tighter than before. "The poor girl is confused," Silas said, addressing the townspeople. "Stockholm Syndrome. The savage has turned her head. But the law is clear. She is property in transit. Her contract was transferred to me upon the default of the original buyer. She belongs to the agency, and I am the agency's representative." He pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket and waved it. "I have the transfer right here, signed and legal." "Signed by whom?" Cora asked. Her voice was deadly calm. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a packet of letters. They were worn, tied with a ribbon. "I have the letters from Mr. Samuel Henderson," Cora said, holding them up. "The man I came to marry. A good man. A man who wrote to me about his garden and his horses." She looked at the sheriff. "Sheriff, what was the date of Mr. Henderson's death?" The sheriff blinked, caught off guard. "Why, it was the 4th of June. A Tuesday." "The 4th of June," Cora repeated. She opened a document in her hand. "And yet, this transfer document, the one Silas claims Mr. Henderson signed to hand me over like a parcel, is dated the 10th of June. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. "He signed it before he died," Silas snapped, his face flushing red. "The date was just when it was filed." "No," Cora said, "because on the 10th of June, Mr. Henderson was already on the ground. I have the letter from the undertaker confirming the burial on the 6th. She turned to the crowd, her eyes blazing. "Silas McGraw forged the signature. He waited until a lonely rancher died, and then he stole the contract so he could claim the bride for his brothel." "Lies," Silas shouted. "The bitch is lying." "She tells the truth." The voice came from the boardwalk. Dr. Harlan stepped out from the shadows of the overhang. He walked with a heavy, angry gait. He stood beside the hitching rail, looking up at Silas. "I treated a girl at the Golden Slipper 2 months ago," Dr. Harlan said, his voice grave. "A girl named Sarah. She came here as a mail-order bride too. She told me she thought she was marrying a minor. Instead, she ended up in Silas's back room. She died of an infection, but the bruises on her body were not from any disease." The doctor turned to the town. "We all knew it. We all looked away because Silas had money. But this is not business. This is slavery." The atmosphere in the street shifted violently. The townsfolk, who had viewed the drama with curiosity, now looked at Silas with dawning horror. The men gripped their tools tighter. The women pulled their shawls closer, exchanging dark looks. Silas saw the change. He saw his power base crumbling under the weight of the truth. He looked at the sheriff, who was staring at his boots, clearly unwilling to intervene. "This is a court matter," Silas yelled, desperation creeping into his tone. "She is still legally bound." "You cannot prove forgery in the street." "We are not in a court, Silas," Cora said. "We are in the town you claim to lead. Look at them. Look at these people." She gestured to the women standing on the boardwalks. "If a woman's body can be bought on paper, Cora cried out, her voice breaking with emotion. Then none of your daughters are safe if he can forge a name and claim a human being. Then what stops him from taking your sister? Your child? Is that the law you want to live under? No, a woman shouted from the back. He's a devil, another cried. Run him out, a man yelled. The mob was turning. The gunmen behind Silas shifted uneasily. Sensing they were on the wrong side of a very large fight, Silas McGraw looked around wildly. His face twisted into a mask of pure, venomous hatred. He looked at Cora, the cause of his ruin. The woman who dared to stand up to him. You ungrateful slut, Silas hissed. He moved. His hand flashed to his hip. No, Nayati roared. It happened in the space of a heartbeat. Silas drew a heavy revolver, leveling it not at Nayati, but at Cora. He knew he was finished, and he wanted to destroy the thing that had broken him. Cora froze, the dark bore of the barrel staring her in the face, but Nayati was already moving. He had anticipated the violence that a coward resorts to when cornered. He leaped from his horse, hitting the dust and sprinting forward. As Silas's finger tightened on the trigger, Cora did not cower. She threw herself sideways, trying to make herself a smaller target. But she did not run away. She reached for the rifle on her saddle. Nayati slammed into her, shoving her violently out of the line of fire. Bang! The gunshot echoed like a cannon blast in the enclosed street. Nayati jerked back, his body spinning from the impact. A spray of bright red blood misted the air. He collapsed into the dust, clutching his left shoulder. Cora screamed a sound of raw, tearing grief. For a second, there was total silence. Then, the town of Esperanza Gulch exploded. He shot him! Maria Reyes screamed from the door of the boarding house. He shot an unarmed man. Drop it, Silas! Dr. Harlan shouted, pulling a small derringer from his coat pocket. 3 men from the town drew their own pistols, aiming them squarely at Silas. The hired gunmen on the porch raised their hands in the air, backing away rapidly, signaling they wanted no part of this. Silas stood there, smoke drifting from his gun, his eyes wide with madness. He cocked the hammer again, aiming at Nayati, who was trying to rise. Sheriff! Cora screamed, scrambling through the dust to cover Nayati's body with her own. Do your job! The sheriff looked at Silas. He looked at the woman shielding the fallen Apache. He looked at the town that was ready to tear him apart if he did nothing. Damn you, Silas, the sheriff muttered. He drew his Colt Peacemaker. He did not hesitate. He fired a single shot. The bullet struck Silas in the right forearm, shattering the bone. Silas shrieked, dropping his gun. He clutched his ruined arm, falling to his knees on the boardwalk, wailing like a child. Get a rope, someone shouted. No. The sheriff stepped forward, his gun still raised. No rope. We do this by the book. He is under arrest for attempted murder, forgery, and fraud. 2 deputies rushed forward, grabbing the screaming Silas and dragging him toward the jailhouse. The hired gunmen mounted their horses and galloped out of town, kicking up dust, vanishing as quickly as their paycheck had. But Cora saw none of this. She was on her knees in the red dirt, her hands pressing frantically against Nayati's shoulder. The blood was dark and hot, seeping through her fingers. Nayati, she sobbed. Nayati, look at me. Nayati groaned, his eyelids fluttering. His face was gray beneath his tan. Cora. I am here, she said, ripping the hem of her petticoat to make a compress. I am right here. Did we win? He rasped, gritting his teeth against the pain. We won. Cora wept, pressing the cloth against the wound. Silas is gone. The town is with us. She leaned down, her forehead resting against his sweat-slicked brow. The fear of the past, the shame of her history. It all vanished. There was only this man who had taken a bullet meant for her. Don't you dare die, she whispered fiercely. Do not you dare leave me alone in this world. Nayati James, I didn't come all this way, across an entire continent, just to lose you now. Nayati's eyes focused on hers. A faint, pained smile touched his lips. You came a long way to find a savage I found a husband, Cora said, her voice trembling with the weight of the confession. I found the only man I have ever loved. The words hung in the air, more powerful than the gunshot had been. Nayati reached up with his good hand, his bloody fingers brushing her cheek. Then I cannot die, he whispered. I have a promise to keep. Dr. Harlan was beside them then, his bag open. Move aside. Cora, let me see him. Cora moved back, but she did not let go of Nayati's hand. Atsa and Tala stood guard, their rifles lowered but their eyes vigilant. The townspeople formed a circle around them, but it was not a circle of judgment anymore. It was a circle of protection. The sheriff walked over, looking down at the scene. He looked tired, aged by 10 years and 10 minutes. He holstered his gun and took off his hat. He looked at the crowd, then at Cora. Folks, the sheriff said, his voice loud enough to be heard over Silas's distant wailing from the jail cell. I want to make something clear. I have seen the documents. I have seen the evidence. He paused, clearing his throat. The transfer of contract regarding Miss Ellison was illegal and void. The marriage between Nayati James and Cora Ellison, performed by the justice of the peace and witnessed by God and this town, is valid. She is his wife. He is her husband. And any man who says otherwise will answer to me. It was done. The legal chain was broken. Maria Reyes rushed forward with a basin of water. Women who had shunned Cora days ago now offered clean linen for bandages. Cora looked up at the sheriff and nodded once a silent truce. Then she looked back at Nayati. Dr. Harlan was probing the wound. The bullet went clean through. Nayati, it missed the bone and the lung. You are a lucky son of a gun. It will hurt like hell, but you will live. Cora let out a breath she felt she had been holding for her entire life. She squeezed Nayati's hand. Home, she whispered. Let us go home. Nayati squeezed back, his grip weak but steady. Yes, home. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows across the street. The red dust was stained darker now, but the air was clear. The storm had broken, and for the first time the path ahead was not one of flight, but of return. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of pain and exhaustion, a haze of red dust and the metallic smell of blood. But the panic that had once defined Cora Ellison's life was gone, replaced by a cold, steel-spined resolve. She did not weep as they rode. She kept her mare close to the paint horse, her eyes fixed on Nayati's swaying form, ready to catch him if he fell. When they finally reached the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the mesas, painting the sky in violent streaks of purple and gold. Atsa helped Cora lower Nayati from the saddle. The warrior was gray-faced, his skin clammy, but he did not make a sound. They laid him on the sturdy wooden table in the main room. It was the same table where they had eaten silent meals, the same table where she had signed the ledger. Now, it was an operating table. Dr. Harlan arrived an hour later, his mule lathered. He did not waste time with pleasantries. He rolled up his sleeves, washed his hands in the basin of boiling water Cora had prepared, and laid out his instruments. The bullet passed through, as I said, Dr. Harlan muttered, probing the wound with a silver instrument. But it took some of the muscle with it, and the vessel is leaking. I need to cauterize it and stitch it tight. It will not be pleasant. Do it, Nayati grins out through clenched teeth. Cora, the doctor said, not looking up. I need you to hold the lantern. Steady, and keep the pressure on this cloth when I tell you. A month ago, Cora would have fainted at the sight of the dark blood pulsing from the torn flesh. A month ago, she would have been sick at the smell of the whiskey the doctor poured over the wound. But tonight, she stood at the head of the table. Her hands, calloused from the reins and the hoe, did not tremble. She held the lantern high, casting a harsh, unwavering light on the injury. When the doctor nodded, she pressed the clean linen against the wound, feeling the hot, slick blood soak through to her fingers. She did not look away. She looked at Nayati's face. His eyes were squeezed shut, sweat beading on his forehead, his jaw muscles jumping as he fought the agony. Stay with me, she whispered. brushing a damp lock of hair from his brow with her clean hand. "You are not leaving me." "Done," Dr. Harlan announced finally, tying off the last stitch with a snap of his wrist. He exhaled a long breath and wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "He is as tough as old leather. This one. He will have a fever tonight, but he will live." The doctor looked at Cora. He saw the blood on her hands, the fierce set of her jaw, the way she stood guard over her husband. "You have changed, Mrs. James," the doctor said quietly. "I dare say Boston would not recognize you." "Boston is a long way away," Cora replied, her voice steady. "And I am exactly who I need to be." The weeks that followed were a slow, quiet battle of a different kind. Nayati, a man used to the boundless freedom of the desert and the constant motion of work, made a terrible patient. He hated the weakness that kept him confined to the bed. He hated that Atsa had to tend the horses while he lay useless. But Cora would not let him rise. She became the keeper of the gate, the guardian of his recovery. By day, she worked the ranch with Atsa. She learned to mend the fences that the wind had knocked down. She learned to identify which corn stalks were ready for harvest. She kept the ledger, counting every penny and every grain. By night, she sat by Nayati's bedside. She changed his bandages with gentle, efficient hands. She fed him broth when he was too weak to hold the spoon. She wiped his face with cool clothes when the fever spiked in the deep hours of the night. It was in these quiet, dark hours that the true healing happened. It was not just flesh knitting together. It was the knitting of two souls that had been frayed by the world. One night, the wind howled around the cabin, sounding like the screams of the past. Cora had fallen asleep in the chair beside the bed, her head resting on the mattress. The nightmare came, as it often did. She was back in the parlor in Boston. The door was locked. The heavy smell of brandy was choking her. She was small and weak, and the laughter was loud. "You are nothing," the voice said. "You are just a thing to be used." "No!" Cora cried out in her sleep, jerking awake. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was gasping, her skin cold with sweat. A hand covered hers. It was warm, rough, and anchored her to the present. "Cora!" Nayati's voice was raspy from sleep, but strong. "Look at me." She looked down. Nayati was watching her in the dim light of the embers. He did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with recognition. He knew the ghosts. He battled them too. I saw them," she whispered, shame flushing her cheeks. "I saw him." Nayati squeezed her hand. His grip was not the crushing hold of a captor. It was the steady support of a foundation. "He is not here," Nayati said firmly. "He is a shadow. You are here, in Arizona, in our house." "I feel dirty," she confessed, the old words slipping out. "Sometimes, in the dark, I still feel like I belong to what happened to me." Nayati pulled gently on her hand, bringing her closer until she was leaning over him. He reached up and touched the scar on her wrist, his thumb tracing the white line. "You are mine," he said. The words were fierce, possessive in a way that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with belonging. "Not because I paid for a ticket, not because I signed a paper. You are mine because you chose to stay. You are mine because you saved my life. And I am yours." He looked deep into her eyes. "A man does not own the land because he puts a fence around it. He belongs to the land because he bleeds for it. We have bled for each other. Cora, that is the only claim that matters." Cora let out a shuddering breath. The parlor in Boston faded. The smell of brandy was replaced by the scent of sage and wood smoke. She laid her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. "I am yours," she whispered. And for the first time, the nightmares did not return that night. While Nayati healed, the world outside the ranch began to shift. The confrontation in the street had broken something open in Esperanza Gulch. It was as if a boil had been lanced, and the poison was finally draining away. Maria Reyes rode out to the ranch once a week, bringing supplies and news. She sat on the porch with Cora, shelling peas and talking while Atsa played a flute in the yard. "Silas is finished," Maria said with grim satisfaction one afternoon. The territorial judge arrived 3 days ago. The trial was short. Did he try to buy his way out? Cora asked. He tried. Maria laughed. But he had no friends left. The sheriff testified against him. Can you imagine the sheriff stood up and told the judge exactly how Silas altered the dates on the contracts? He said he was following the letter of the law. Maria snorted. The sheriff is a weather vane. He points whichever way the wind blows, but at least now the wind is blowing the right way. And the women? Cora asked softly. They spoke, Maria said, her eyes darkening. 3 of them, girls who worked at the Golden Slipper. I gave them rooms at my boarding house so they would be safe. They told the judge how Silas held their debts over their heads, how he threatened them with jail if they did not entertain. Cora closed her eyes. She could have been one of them. If Nayati had not stepped out of the shadows on that platform, she would have been standing in that courtroom, or buried in the pauper's field like the girl Dr. Harlan had mentioned. The judge sentenced him to 20 years, Maria said. In the territorial prison at Yuma. They say the heat there breaks a man in a month. He was dragged out screaming about his property rights. Good, Cora said. She felt no triumph, only a deep, settling relief. And the town? Quiet, Maria said. People are polite. They see you. Cora, they see what you did. They do not stare so much at the Apaches who come to trade now. It is not perfect. It never will be. But the fear is less. The ranch, too, was changing. It was no longer just a hideout. It was becoming a beacon. As Nayati regained his strength, he began to walk the perimeter of the property. He and Cora stood by the gate one evening, watching the sunset bleed over the Dragoon Mountains. We have empty rooms, Cora said suddenly. Nayati looked at her. We have the cabin. It is small. We have the barn loft, Cora said. And there is timber in the lower canyon. We could build a bunkhouse, just a small one. For what? Nayati asked. We do not have cattle that need hands. Not for hands, Cora said. She turned to him, her face serious. For them, the women. She took a breath. Silas is gone, but there are other men like him. There are other agencies, other girls getting off trains in towns where they know no one, holding letters from men who might be dead or cruel. I was lucky. Nayati, I had you. Most of them have no one. She gestured to the vast, open land. We have space. We have food. We could let it be known, quietly, that if a woman finds herself trapped in a contract she did not agree to, there is a place she can come, a place to sleep where the door locks from the inside, until she can figure out what she wants to do. Nayati studied her face. He saw the fire in her, the need to turn her own trauma into a shield for others. You want to save them all, he said softly. I know I cannot, Cora replied. But I remember how it felt, standing on that platform, feeling like an object. If I can stop one woman from feeling that, is it not worth the timber? Nayati looked out at the desert. He thought of his own people, scattered and hunted. He thought of the women in his village who had lost everything. We cannot fix the whole desert. Cora, Nayati said, his voice deep. The sun is too hot, and the world is too cruel. But, he took her hand. We can fix this piece, this acre, this home. So we build, Cora asked. We build, Nayati agreed. Construction began as soon as Nayati could swing a hammer. They worked side by side, Cora hauling the planks, Nayati driving the nails. Atsa grumbled about the noise but carved intricate designs into the support beams when he thought no one was looking. But as the walls of the small bunkhouse went up, a shadow of doubt crept into Cora's mind. One evening, she sat on the porch steps, staring at the frame of the new building. Nayati came out, wiping sawdust from his hands. He sat beside her, sensing her mood. The wood is straight, he said. The roof will hold. Why do you look like you are carrying a stone? Am I doing the same thing? Cora asked, her voice tight. What thing? Silas, she said, looking down at her hands. He brought women here. He decided where they would go. He controlled their fate. Am I Am I just collecting them, pulling them out of one life and dragging them into mine? What if they do not want to be here? What if I am just another person trying to tell them who to be? Nayati was silent for a long moment. He watched a hawk circling high above the canyon. Silas built a cage, Nayati said. He put bars on the windows and charged a price for the key. You are building a door. Cora. He turned to face her. That is the difference. A cage keeps you in. A door lets you choose. You are not dragging them here. You are lighting a fire so they can find the path. If they come, they come. If they leave, they leave. You are not their master. You are just the innkeeper. Cora looked at the unfinished structure. She imagined a woman sleeping there, safe, with no debt hanging over her head. An open door, she repeated. I can do that. Yes, Nayati said, and I will stand guard to make sure no wolf tries to walk through it. By the time the first snow dusted the peaks of the mountains, the bunkhouse was finished. It was simple, smelling of pine and hope. There were 4 beds, each with a quilt Cora had sewn. There was a stove in the corner and a table with a pitcher of water. It was not a palace, but to a woman running for her life, it would look like heaven. Atsa spent 3 days working on the main gate of the ranch. He selected a massive piece of cedar wood and carved it with painstaking slowness. He did not let Cora or Nayati see it until it was done, when he finally hung it over the entrance. Cora gasped. It was not a word. It was a symbol. An Apache design of concentric circles and jagged lines. What does it mean? Cora asked. It is the mountain, Atsa explained, pointing to the peaks. And the fire. And the people who stand in the circle? He looked at Nayati, then at Cora. It means the place where the spirit is not tied. Home of the free. Nayati translated loosely, smiling at the old man. Cora went to the shed and found a piece of flat board and a pot of black paint. She thought for a long time about what to write. She thought of the contract Silas had waived. She thought of the phrase, property in transit. She dipped the brush and wrote in clear, block letters. She nailed the sign to the post beneath Atsa's carving. No woman is property beyond this gate. It was a warning to the world, and it was a promise to everyone who crossed the threshold. Nayati stood beside her, reading the sign. He slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. His shoulder was stiff, a reminder of the bullet, but his arm was strong. It is a good sign, he said. It is a true sign. Cora replied. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. The sun was warm on her face. She looked down at her wrist. The scar was still there, a white line of history. But it was just a scar now. It was no longer a shackle. Someone is coming, Nayati said quietly, his eyes scanning the road. Cora looked. A single rider was approaching. It was a woman, riding a tired mule, clutching a battered suitcase. She looked dusty, terrified, and lost. She stopped at the gate, looking up at the strange Apache symbol and the English sign. She looked at the house, then at the couple standing on the porch, the dark warrior and the woman with the golden hair. Cora did not wait. She stepped off the porch and walked out into the sunlight. She opened the gate wide. Welcome, Cora called out, her voice carrying across the red earth. You are safe here. The woman hesitated, then urged her mule forward, crossing the line from the world of property into the world of choice. Nayati watched them, a small smile playing on his lips. The war with Silas was over, but the work of freedom had just begun, and for the first time in his life, Nayati James knew he was exactly where he belonged. 3 years had passed since the trial of Silas McGraw, and the red dust of the Arizona Territory remained as relentless as ever. It coated the eaves of the cabin, settled in the creases of the laundry hanging on the line, and found its way into the water buckets. But the silence that used to hang over the ranch, the heavy, watchful silence of a fortress, was gone. In its place was a chaotic, vibrant symphony of life. The ranch had not grown into a sprawling empire. It remained a modest collection of buildings nestled against the red rocks. But the bunkhouse Cora and Nayati had built was no longer empty. Over the last 30 months, nearly 20 women had passed through its door. Some stayed for a week, resting their weary bones before taking the stagecoach to San Francisco or Denver. Others, like a widow named Margaret who had been sold a false deed to a mine, stayed for 6 months to earn money baking bread for the town. And then there were the children. Cora Ellison James sat on the porch, a leather-bound journal open on her lap. The ink was drying on the page, the date written out in her neat, looping hand, October the 12th, 1888. She looked up from her writing. In the yard, near the corral where the horses dozed in the afternoon sun, a small girl with wild black hair and fierce blue eyes was chasing a chicken. She ran with the fearless abandon of someone who had never known a locked door. "Lena," Cora called out, a smile touching her lips. "Leave the poor hen alone. She has work to do." The little girl, Lena Atza James, stopped and giggled. She was 2 years old, a living testament to the union of two worlds that society said should never touch. She wore a dress made of calico, but on her feet were soft moccasins that Atza had stitched for her. Lena ran up the steps, her face flushed with heat and joy. She scrambled into Cora's lap, heedless of the ink. "Mama, story," Lena demanded, pointing to the book. "This is not a storybook, little bird," Cora said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "This is a record, a list of names." "Why? So we do not forget," Cora said softly. "Every name here is a brave woman who walked through our gate." Lena grabbed Cora's hand, her small fingers tracing the white, thin line of the scar on Cora's wrist. It was a habit she had developed, a source of endless fascination. "Owie?" Lena asked, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. For a moment, the old shadow flickered in Cora's heart. The memory of the silk rope, the smell of the brandy, the suffocating terror of that night in Boston. But it was distant now, like a storm that had passed over the mountains years ago. "No," Cora said firmly. "Not an owie. It is a mark, like the brand on Papa's horse." "Who put it there?" Lena asked. Cora looked at her daughter. She did not lie. She believed that truth, even hard truth, was better than the prettiest fable. "A man who thought he could own people," Cora explained gently. "Long ago, some people thought they could buy a person on a piece of paper. They thought if they tied you up, you belonged to them." Lena frowned, trying to process this with her toddler's logic. "Like a goat." "Yes," Cora said. "Like a goat, but Papa and we proved them wrong." Nayati came around the corner of the cabin then. He was carrying a sack of feed over his shoulder. The years had etched a few more lines around his eyes. The limp from the bullet wound in his shoulder still showed when the rain was coming, but he looked stronger than ever. He was no longer the lone wolf guarding a cave. He was the patriarch of a tribe of his own making. He dropped the sack by the door and wiped his forehead. He looked at the two of them, the woman with the golden hair and the child with the Apache spirit, and his expression softened into profound peace. "What are you teaching her?" Nayati asked, sitting on the step below them. "History," Cora said. Nayati reached out and took Lena's hand, then Cora's. "Tell her the important part." "Which part?" Cora teased. "That freedom is not given," Nayati said, his voice deep and resonant, like the earth itself. He looked at his daughter. "Listen to me, Lena. The world will try to take things from you. It will try to give you a price tag. But freedom is something you take. You stand on your own 2 feet and you take it. And then, when you have it, you share it." "Share it," Lena repeated, liking the sound of the word. "Yes," Nayati said. "Like bread." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted their lesson. The dogs by the barn began to bark, not aggressively, but with an alerting woof. Cora stood up, shading her eyes. A mule was plodding up the long, dusty road from the direction of Esperanza Gulch. On its back sat a figure that looked ready to collapse. It was a woman. She wore a heavy travel suit that was covered in the red dust of the road. Her hat was askew, and she was clutching the pommel of the saddle as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Nayati stood, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt, a reflex that would never truly fade, but then he relaxed. Another one. Cora walked down the steps. She did not wait at the door. She walked to the gate, passing under the cedar sign Atsa had carved, passing the board that read, "No woman is property beyond this gate." The mule stopped. The woman looked up. Her face was streaked with tears and dirt. She looked terrified, exhausted, and utterly defeated. She held a crumpled piece of paper in her hand, a letter from a prospective husband who had likely turned out to be a drunkard, a phantom, or a tyrant. Cora reached for the mule's bridle. "It is all right," she called out. "You can get down. You are safe here." The woman slid from the saddle, her legs buckling. Cora caught her. I have nowhere to go." The woman sobbed into Cora's shoulder. He wasn't who he said he was. I spent every penny to get here. I cannot go back to Boston. I am ruined." Cora stiffened. The voice, it was cracked with dehydration and panic, but there was a cadence to it, a familiar, haughty lilt that she had not heard in 5 years. She pulled back, holding the woman by the shoulders. She looked past the grime, past the sunburn, past the desperation. "Elizabeth," Cora whispered. The woman blinked, her eyes focusing. She stared at Cora, at the plain work dress, the sun-browned skin, the strong, capable hands. "Cora," the woman gasped. "Cora Ellison." It was Elizabeth, her cousin, the same Elizabeth who, 5 years ago in a parlor in Boston, had turned her back on Cora. Elizabeth, who had sneered, "You have shamed this family. Cora, you are spoiled. You should leave before you ruin my prospects, too. Now." Elizabeth stood in the dust of the Arizona Territory, a victim of the same lie that had ensnared Cora. For a second, a dark, petty part of Cora wanted to laugh. It wanted to say, See how easy it is to fall? You thought you were better. You thought you were safe because you were good." But then she felt Elizabeth trembling. She saw the raw terror in her cousin's eyes, the terror of a woman who realizes she is nothing but merchandise in a man's world. Nayati had walked up behind Cora. He recognized the name. He knew the story. He placed a hand on Cora's back, a silent question. Cora looked at Elizabeth. She did not see an enemy. She saw a mirror. I didn't know," Elizabeth stammered, fresh tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "I thought I was marrying a banker. He sold the contract to a saloon keeper. I ran away. Cora, I am so sorry. I said such terrible things." "Hush," Cora said. She pulled Elizabeth into a fierce embrace. "It wasn't you," Cora whispered into her cousin's dusty hair. "And it wasn't me. It was never about our virtue. Elizabeth, it was about their power." They stood there for a long moment. 2 women from Boston hugging in the middle of the desert, crying for the girls they used to be and the women they had been forced to become. The barrier of judgment that had separated them, the line between the pure and the fallen, dissolved into dust. "Come," Cora said, pulling back and wiping her eyes. "We have a place for you." She led Elizabeth toward the bunkhouse. She opened the door. The room was cool and smelled of pine. The beds were made with clean, crisp sheets. Cora guided Elizabeth to the bed nearest the window. "Sit," Elizabeth sat, looking around as if she expected a trap. "What? What do I have to do? How do I pay you?" Cora knelt and began to unlace Elizabeth's dusty boots. "You do nothing. You sleep. You eat." She pulled the boots off and set them aside. She looked up at her cousin. "You can sleep here," Cora said, repeating the vow she made to every woman who crossed her threshold. "The door locks from the inside. No one comes in unless you invite them. Tomorrow, when you are rested, you decide where you will go. You can stay, you can go to California, you can go back east. It is your choice." Elizabeth touched the quilt. "My choice." "Your choice," Cora affirmed. "That is the only rule we have." She stood up and kissed Elizabeth's forehead. "Sleep well, cousin. You are home." That night, the desert was quiet. The moon was full, casting a silver light over the ranch. The children were asleep. Elizabeth was sleeping in the deep, dreamless sleep of the rescued. Cora lay in bed next to Nayati. The window was open, letting in the cool night breeze that smelled of sage and cooling stone. She turned on her side, watching her husband. He was staring at the ceiling, one arm behind his head. "She used to hate me," Cora whispered. "She did not hate you," Nayati replied softly. "She feared being you, and today, she became you." "It is a strange circle," Cora mused. "But I am glad she is here. I am glad I could be the one to open the gate." Nayati turned his head to look at her. The moonlight caught the sharp angles of his face, softening the warrior into the lover. He reached out and traced the line of her jaw. "You have built a good thing, Cora," he said. "A strong thing." Cora smiled, moving closer to him, resting her head on his chest. His heart beat strong and steady against her ear. She let her hand drift down his chest, over the old scars, over the rough skin that told the story of his survival. "Nayati?" she asked, a playful lilt entering her voice. She looked up at him, her eyes dancing in the moonlight. "Are you still sure about the bargain you made? Are you still sure you want a bride who is not a virgin?" It was an old joke between them now, a way of taking the sting out of the past, of reclaiming the words that had once hurt her. Nayati chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. He rolled onto his side, pulling her against him. He kissed her forehead, then her eyelids, then her lips. "I never wanted a virgin, Cora," he whispered against her mouth. "I wanted you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, a kiss that spoke of years of shared struggle, of battles fought back to back, of a love that had been forged in the fire of adversity. "I wanted a woman who could ride through a storm," Nayati murmured. "I wanted a woman who could look a gunman in the eye. I wanted a partner." Cora sighed, melting into him. "You have me, every part of me." "And you have me," Nayati vowed. "Until the mountains crumble, the camera of the mind pulls back, leaving the lovers in the sanctuary of their room, safe behind walls they built with their own hands." Voice over Cora's voice, calm and aged with wisdom. "I was shipped west like cargo, listed on a bill of lading between sacks of flour and crates of whiskey. I was damaged goods in a world that only valued the pristine. But I stayed. I stayed because a man looked at me, really looked at me, and saw a human being, not a purchase. Love did not make me his property. It made us each other's home. We learned that freedom is not a gift you wait for. It is the ground you stand on, and the hand you hold out to pull someone else up." The scene fades from the intimate darkness of the bedroom to the bright, vast expanse of the next morning. The sky over the Arizona territory is turning a deep, bruising purple as the sun begins to set again. The red dust glows as if it is on fire. In the yard of the ranch, Lena and 2 other children, 1 Mexican, 1 white, are running. They are playing tag, their laughter ringing out clear and bright, rising up into the vast silence of the desert. They run freely, with no fear of who is watching, no fear of who owns them. The camera pans up, moving past the children, past the cabin where smoke curls from the chimney, past the bunkhouse where Elizabeth is sitting on the steps, breathing in the first free air of her life. It comes to rest on the heavy cedar gate. The Apache symbol for home of the free is etched deep into the wood. Below it, the small sign sways gently in the evening wind. The words stark and undeniable against the red rock landscape. No woman is property beyond this gate. The wind blows, kicking up a small cloud of red dust, carrying the seeds of change across the wild, beautiful and unforgiving land. Thank you so much for listening to the final chapter of Cora and Nayati's story. It has been a long journey from the dust of the train station to the peace of the ranch. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you that freedom and love are worth fighting for. If you enjoyed this series, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, so you do not miss out on future adventures. Please smash that like button and hit the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you thought of the ending. Did Elizabeth's arrival surprise you? Let's chat in the comments. Until next time, keep riding.